All right, welcome everybody. Let's do this. So, lesson number 20, putting it all together. So we're gonna take the idea of transformations with domain and range. So for the first one, let's just sketch the following functions and then find the domain and range for them. So take your time and sketch these functions. And what do they look like? So let's see, x squared. Here we know x squared looks like this, right? And please don't forget the arrows, okay? Because the arrows will be important for determining the domain and range, right? What does square root of x look like? Just like this, right? What does x cubed look like? Just like this. And what does absolute value x look like? Just like this, okay? Now what I'd like you to do is think about what is the domain of x squared? What is the domain of square root of x, right? And remember, when you ask about domain and range, domain, let me write it over here really quickly. So domain, what's the question you ask? How far left and right can you go? So let's see. For domain over here, how far left does the function go? The function goes to negative infinity. That's how far left it can go. How far right can it go? It goes to positive infinity, okay? And don't you remember we have the parentheses, right, for infinity signs. What I want you to do is try and, don't be afraid to make mistakes, try and find a domain and range for all of these, okay? Let's take a look at the next one. What's the range? You know, let's say you want to see how it's done. What's the range? Okay, so how far, you see, when we talk about domain, we talk about how far left and how far right we can go. When we talk about range, we talk about how far down and up can we go. So let's see, what's the lowest y value you have? The lowest y value is 0. But you also have it, right? You have that point over here. And what's the highest y value you have? It's positive infinity, okay? What about over here? What's the domain of this graph? Well, let's see. How far left does the graph go? The graph just goes to, let me zoom in a little bit. How far left does the graph go? The graph just goes to 0, and you have it. And how far right does the graph go? It goes to positive infinity. Okay, what's the range over here? How far down does it go? It goes to 0, right, on the y-axis. And how high does it go? Here, it's going to infinity, but it's going to positive infinity very, very slowly compared to something like this. Like, you see how this just goes to infinity, like right away. This one kind of takes its time to go to infinity. Okay, let's try the next one, right? All right, x cubed. This one's not too bad. So what's the domain? How far left can you go? Negative infinity. How far right can you go? Positive infinity. Okay. And how far down does the graph go? Negative infinity. And how high does the graph go? Positive infinity. Okay. Let's take a look at absolute value x. What is the domain of this function? How far left can you go? Negative infinity. How far right can you go? Positive infinity. What's the range? What's the lowest y value you have? It's 0. And what's the highest y value you have is positive infinity. Okay, great. So that's just like kind of the warm-up for today's lesson. So what I'd like you to do is let's turn the page and let's take a look at these functions over here. So yesterday we learned how to graph these functions, right? So what I want you to do is find the domain and range for each of these functions. So let's see, where is f of x? F of x is over here. It's x plus 3 squared minus 2. So what I want you to do is, for this graph, for f of x, without using the calculator, try to not use the calculator. Actually, no, don't even try, just don't use the calculator. Graph this, sketch it, and then find the domain and range of it, okay? And try and do that for every single one. Try and do it for f of x, do it for g of x, do it for h of x, and do it for j of x. Okay, and when you're done, try and find a domain and range of the new transformations on your own. Okay, and pause the video. Take your time. There's no rush for this. Let's see, how do you graph it? So x plus 3 squared. So here, the parent function, just like the homework from yesterday, the parent function is x squared. Okay? How is it being transformed? This is 3 to the left, and this is 2 down. Okay? What about this one over here? This is, how do you transform this one? And well, what's the parent function? It's absolute value x. How's it being transformed? Remember, this -1 is inside, so it's 1 to the right. And this one is 3 up. Okay? But let's take a look at this one. So 3 to the left, so it goes 1, 2, 3, and 2 down. 1, 2. So notice that the original x squared looks like this, right? So if the original x squared looks like this, all we're doing is moving it from the center, left 3, down 2, and then bam, just making our x squared. Okay? What I want you to do is, if you haven't done it, try and do this one by yourself, right? Let's see. So this is 1 to the right and up 3. So 1, 1, 2, 3. And then here, what does absolute value x look like? It looks like a V, just like this. Okay? And that's what you need to do. Now, the idea is, what is the domain and range of this graph? Originally, for x squared, right, x squared had its own domain that we did. Here, what will be the domain of this graph? Let's see. How far left does this graph go? Okay, so it goes to -infinity. How far right does the graph go? It goes to +infinity. So the domain didn't change from the original x squared. And let's see, what did change? What's the range of this function? What's the lowest y value you have? Notice that the lowest y value you have is -2. Okay, that's the lowest y value you have. So it goes bracket -2. And what's the highest y value you have? It's +infinity. Okay, let's see for this one. The domain and range, so domain, how far left does the graph go? -infinity. How far right does the graph go? +infinity. What's the lowest y value you have? The lowest y value you have is 3. So it goes from here and this goes to 3. And what's the highest y value you have? It's +infinity. Okay, let's see the next part. Okay, so h of x, this one. Here, what's the original parent function? The original parent function is square root of x. And how does that look like? It looks like this. Okay? And let's take a look at how it's being transformed. So here, this is 2 to the left. This is 4 down. And this negative on the outside, so negative outside, implies reflection over the x-axis. Okay, so let's see. I gotta go 2 left. So 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, and the original graph, square root of x looks like this. So what are we gonna do to this so it reflects over the x-axis? You gotta think of a flip. Take this and you flip it. So it'll look like that. Okay? And that's it. What's the domain of this graph? Let's see, how far left does the graph go? Well, the farthest left you have looks like the farthest left you have is -2. So -2 is the farthest left and you have it. And how far right does the graph go? It goes to +infinity. Okay, what's the range? What's the lowest y value you have? Notice that this is going to -infinity. And what's the highest y value you have? Let's see over here. The highest y value you have is 1, 2, 3, 4. It's 4. And notice that it kind of, these two help determine to shift the domain and range. So here it goes to -4. I'm sorry, this should be a negative. Okay. All right, let's look at the next one. Here, negative absolute value of x minus 2. So here, what's the original function? It's absolute value x. How is it being transformed? It's 2 right, 1 down, and reflects over x. Okay? And then how does that go? So let's see. 1, 2, 1, and then here, the absolute value of x looks like this, right? So if it looks like this and we're going to reflect it over the x-axis, we just have to take this and flip it down. So here, it'll just look like that. Okay. What's the domain and range of this graph? Well, let's see. What's the domain of this graph? How far left does it go? Negative infinity. How far right does it go? Positive infinity. How far down, what's the lowest y value you have? It's negative infinity. And what's the highest y value you have? It is -1. And you have it. Okay, because here, this negative, you see the highest y value you have is -1 over here. And that kind of tells it to you over here. Okay, I hope this helped. What I want you to do is try and do letter B and C by yourself, and I'll show it in the next video.